Okay, fantastic. Happy Tuesday, Abhishek. Nice to see you, sir. So the the theme we've been looking at is the topic of resilience, which is probably the official sponsor of the year 2020, the official meditation mind sponsor of the year 2020, resilience. A good friend of mine, Don Finn, he talks about the difference between just resilience and bearing something and being anti-fragile. There's a book called Anti-Fragile by Nicholas Nassim Taleb talks about how to not just bear and endure something, but actually take a challenge as an opportunity to thrive. And he used in the book Anti-Fragile, it uses the example of being like a fire emboldened by wind. Obviously, a small fire would be put out by wind, but a big fire is actually emboldened and strengthened by wind. And just on a just on a just from a financial point of view, if you look at some companies, it's a crisis that actually makes them thrive, and that financial impact is just a reflection of how some organizations they'll get an idea. Obviously, Zoom is doing very well during this pandemic, but it's not to say that the way organizations work is the real primary guide for our lives, but we can think: can we be not just resilient, but can we be thriving in the face of a more difficult situation by adopting new habits, changing the way we approach our life, learning new things, starting new undertakings, etc. And this is in the traditional teachings. This is called transforming adversity into the path, and it's one of the most powerful things we can do is to not be afraid of difficulties, but in fact be courageous in the face of them. So why don't we get started just with a bit of meditation as usual, just to settle our mind and to prepare ourselves for listening and thinking about this topic deeply. So we can begin as usual just by finding a comfortable position. We may find it helpful to stretch our back and shoulders, adjust our posture, and just become aware of the space around us. The noises around us, physical environment. Our senses will ground us in the present moment and help us to cut through some daydreaming and worries. And within our body, we can become aware of the feeling of our body, the feeling of sitting on our seat. We take a deep breath in and out just to start to reset. And we can take another deep breath in and out and just invite ourselves to relax. And then we can ask ourselves, what is important now? And as we breathe in and out, we just become aware of the feeling of our breath throughout our body. And we can think in the brief time we have here, what is our intention for this session? What direction would we like to take our life? How could we shift things for ourselves, for others? And then we can open our eyes, rise from meditation. Okay. In in a lot of traditional teachings, traditional religious teachings and so forth, there was a lot of focus on what people could do beyond this life, right? That's a lot of the focus, partly because there traditionally were not so many possibilities within this life, right? You're born, you're going to die. People are subject to a lot of sickness, death, vulnerability. Life is basically a process of pursuing food and water, finding a family, not a whole lot of freedom socially to move through different, social ranks, change jobs. Your life is fairly well set. Um, what's interesting in our modern world is that people are much more flexible, right? A lot of people still have very limited options because of lack of money or education and whatever country they were born in and circumstances beyond their control. But there seems to be an increasing number of people who have the freedom to travel, to learn different things, to change their career, to make new relationships, and so I think the power of our individual actions is much more obvious. The traditional teachings were on karma. Certainly in Buddhism, Hinduism, a lot of the focus was on karma. Karma, you do an action, and actions are incredibly powerful. You guide your future, right? You think in terms of future lives and, huge change. You could be born as an animal, or, human, or deity, or something like this. Obviously, if you're thinking outside of this life in a religious context, then of course there's a huge amount of possibility. But we have a lot of awareness now of the scope of history and how individual humans have changed history and how history has evolved in different countries and so forth. And so even within the realm of human existence, we can see a lot of the impact that actions take, a few small actions. I remember, when I was in school, they talked about the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Austria, kicking off World War One, right? One action kicks off an entire world war. And similarly, in our lives, one decision to do this or not do this, to take this job, to, have this conversation, all of these things, we can see probably a lot better the impact of these actions that we take. And so I think we can have, in a non-religious sense, just a deep appreciation for karma in the sense of action, right? What are actions? What is the impact of actions? But there's a deeper meaning to our actions or our karma, in the sense that when we act, this changes how we see the world, right? And it changes, of course, on an outer point of view, it changes the world. But it also changes how we see the world, and it changes who we think we are. So, for example, if we act with confidence, if we speak up when we are a bit timid, then at that moment, at least for that moment, we become a confident person, somebody who can speak confidently. It actually changes our definition of who we are. If we shy away from a conflictive, conflicting, or a situation of conflict, then at that time, at least at that moment, we are a timid person, right? So even our sense of who we are changes. Our sense of what the world is like is changed. So, for example, and it's just interesting. You think about somebody who is suffering from manic depression, very extreme, wake up one day and they're just incredibly excited, so much opportunity, so much possibility, right? Infinite energy being liberated in their mind, right? They wake up the next day and their whole world is a disaster, right? Nothing changed outside, right? From their internal point of view, they swing between a world that is, theirs for the taking, right, when they're manic, versus a world that is just devastating them on every front, right? Their job is terrible, their life is terrible, their world is terrible, their relationships are terrible, they don't like their dog, right? The food tastes terrible, right? They hate the wallpaper, right? It's amazing the power that our mind has, right? It just can turn everything upside down. Like these, at least in the US, we have these old Christmas decorations, right? Where you turn it upside down and it starts to snow, right? You turn it right side up. It's funny that our entire world is like that, in a sense. The entire world is like something inside our mind that we can turn it upside down, shake it, good and bad. And that points to the incredible power that we have, and in the spirit of resilience, or going further and being anti-fragile, and in terms of feeling like through our own small actions we have a degree of control, or perhaps even more. Perhaps we have complete control of our experience. That is perhaps the big message that is being given by all of these systems of internal transformation, whether religious, spiritual teachings, or psychology, or self-help, or whatever they are. They're all about, we can gain control of our world and gain control of our experience by gaining control of our mind. And it really can't be overstated, the power of that. And I feel like whether we have any kind of diagnosable mental illness or not, we can learn a lot from how mental illness works, about how our own minds work on a small scale, on a more moderate scale. Also drugs, people, whether somebody uses drugs or don't use drugs, we can learn a lot from the impact that drugs have on people's minds, right? Because it shows that there's a lot that there's a tie, there's a connection between our world and our mind itself. So just to go back to share some of the slides and sort of re-summarize this topic of resilience that I'd introduced on Saturday. When we look at motivation, the idea of motivation is to be able to sustain our own personal direction, to find energy for the direction we want to move in by finding alignment between what inspires us and the opportunities that we're presented with, to envision in the sense of getting a future vision that we can be passionate about, that we can commit energy towards. And then resilience is the ability to sustain that motivation no matter what happens. And I mentioned before that there's these three aspects: inner calm, emotional resilience, and cognitive resilience. You can get an enormous amount of mileage just from inner calm. I've got this "Don't Panic" from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. That one instruction, right? I think on Saturday I told the story about running meditation centers. I ran meditation centers for 10 years. And the teacher that I learn a lot from these days, Ajahn Sushito, rhymes a bit with Abhishek Saxena, but Ajahn Sushito, he was the abbot for, I think, almost 25 years, the abbot of his meditation center in Chithurst in the UK. A hard job. Actually, running a meditation center was by far harder than any job I've had since, consulting, staying up all night, and, it is very much like being a head of a small business or a CEO or something, except that there's no money that you can use to buy your way out of a situation. You can't hire, skilled people. You're kind of at the mercy of volunteers, and volunteers, of course, they have a lot of conflicting priorities in their life and so forth. So I feel like my experience running meditation center was, and being involved in meditation centers, was a series of slow moving and fast moving disasters over a long period of time. And definitely one of the most beneficial things you could experience in terms of building resilience. And so for myself, my bare minimum practice throughout the whole time was, I'm going to remain calm. Because in fact, that was my job. To remain calm. But if you've got a family, right, then often parents are in a situation where their children force them to remain calm, right? Because you don't want to be panicking in front of your children. If you're a CEO or a leader of an organization, you also have this remit to remain calm, right? And whether you're in that situation or not, it's a really, really good thing to just set as your bare minimum requirement. No matter what happens, I'm not going to panic. So you may not have an external forcing factor, forcing function, forcing you to look calm, act calm. Like this slogan, remain calm and carry on. But we can adopt that as our internal goal so that you can get a phenomenal amount of mileage. Because what happens is, and that is essentially what we're doing in meditation. No matter what's going on, no matter how bad it is, if we sit ourselves down, we look at the present situation, unless there happens to be a physically dangerous situation, like your house is actually on fire, most of the time when we look around, we realize no matter how bad things are at work, physically, there's not that much going on. It's that exciting. So if we unplug from the news, unplug from social media, take some time, take a few breaths, forget about what's going on, we realize actually, just take a walk. This is my summary advice. This is the profound wisdom you've shown up and invested your time for. Just go take a walk. Don't listen to anything. Just look around, or run, or something like that, and you realize actually, there's many parts of the world that are not falling apart right now. As many parts of the world that seem to be falling apart, there are many parts that are not falling apart. So I wanted to kind of skip forward through some of these points that I made on Saturday. How to respond to difficulties. First of all, just accept there are these emotional responses, intellectual responses, and then determination. There's a lot that we can do in the face of difficult situations, but I wanted to kind of take one final point, which was introduced to me in this Search Inside Yourself program that I'd taken. But the reason I feel confident and comfortable sharing these exact points that they shared in that program is that they stole these programs totally from Buddhism. It's just totally stolen from Buddhism. They took it from Martin Seligman. Martin Seligman took it from Buddhism, and Buddhism took it from just looking at the darn mind and how it works. That if you're in the face of a setback, this is a sort of a cognitive way of dealing with difficult situations. You've got two options, right? Pessimist, optimist. Pessimist, this is a disaster. My life's falling apart. This is the end of things. Optimist is okay. Didn't expect that. Okay, let's see where we can take this. Perhaps there's actually a positive situation that we can spin this from. And there's these three aspects. Our mind tends to go in these three directions, and these are very deep, actually. The first is personalization. Are you personalizing what's going on or not? So if we're overwhelmed, for example, just to take one example, if we're overwhelmed at work, is that because we are incompetent and incapable of keeping up? Or if we look at the other option, this optimist option, perhaps it's not personal. Perhaps it's just causes and conditions. Perhaps we're just in a situation where there's a lot going on and we happen to be in the middle of it. Why does it have to be personal? Right? Why does it have to be some indictment on us? Right? If there was a mistake, if we missed a meeting, an important meeting that we were supposed to be at, for example, why does it have to be personal? Why does it have to be an indictment on us? Can't it just be causes and conditions? Given the situation, I happened to not see that notification at that time because I was paying attention to something else. It's just causes and conditions coming together that I didn't notice that. When you look at a lot of the great wisdom that's coming into the IT world these days comes from safety engineering and things like how organizations deal with wildfires, literally physical wildfires, how the National Forestry Service deals with wildfires and emergency response. And you begin to see that there are people who are experts at the people who've really studied safety systems and how you can design safe and resilient systems point to, instead of focusing on how a failure happened and how, trying to find one person to blame, such as ourselves, that's really what we're doing. We're just casting blame on ourselves and we're trying to beat others to it. Sometimes if something gets screwed up, instead of, we just blame ourselves. We say, oh, I'm so stupid. I should have done this. And we beat ourselves up, right? We make it very personal because we think somebody else is going to do that soon. And we want to get there before they do it. And they do. And we don't want to be hit by somebody else. We want to sort of proactively blame ourselves. But in this sort of safety factors engineering world, you see that actually, if you stop paying attention to when people screw up and start paying attention to all of the things that are going right, you realize that actually the individuals involved are holding things together. They're continuously averting catastrophes. And that's what we do basically throughout our working day. We're averting one catastrophe after another. It's only because of the people that things are not falling apart, as opposed to being the people's fault when things do fall apart. Anyway, that's one of many ways of thinking about things where we don't blame ourselves, don't take things personally. The second is that our mind tends to lurch into permanence. Whenever there's a difficult situation, we just think, oh, this is, disaster. I don't know what I'm doing, for example. That's a permanent what's called permanent grasping. It's holding on to that situation as a permanent situation when in fact everything's temporary, right? I was confused about this particular situation. I didn't know what was happening at that particular time, but that's not always the case. I can learn, I can change. And the way things are, when we hold on to permanence, that gets very, very, very heavy, right? Thinking of 2020 as the people who, you know, if people, when people think about 2020, where it gets really heavy is when people think it's permanent. And it's really tempting to just say, okay, the world is a disaster and that's just the way it is. And it's always going to be that way. And no question, there are many, many difficult situations, but there's nothing about this that's permanent. Certainly doesn't mean there's anything about, the pandemic and so forth that's good, but it certainly isn't permanent, the fact that it's getting worse actually means that it's not permanent. That proves that it's not permanent. Things get worse, things get better, right? Huge fires blaze across California or India, and then they die down. Yes, they're a disaster, but no, they're not permanent. And when you think about something as impermanent, and if you imagine looking back, look at the history books, right? What about the pandemics in 1918, right? And the Spanish flu and so forth, the HIV pandemic in the 80s, still going on, of course, in many places, but none of these things are permanent. And that really changes our perception. And that's the key. We change our perception. And then pervasiveness, that something applies to every aspect of our life. If we have a setback, we may just think, oh, I'm just not capable, or I'm not competent. And it's such a pervasive view, right? Like, how is that the case, right? It may be the case that we screwed up in one particular aspect of our life, or we're perhaps just not that competent in one particular area of our life. That is entirely possible. But it doesn't mean that it's again an indictment on every aspect of our life. It applies to, a failure may apply to certain circumstances, but not all. All of these things, basically, if you look at the columns in the right, that's a very, very calm way of viewing things. And let's say we're in a situation where we think somebody at work is making our life terrible, right? Somebody at work is just doing terrible, making terrible decisions, making everything worse. Let's turn this around and take these same 3 points and look at them, right? Is it personal, or is it just that's their background, right? Are they making what we see as bad decisions because they're a bad person? Or just because, certain internal causes, that's the way they saw the situation, that was the background they had. Because of their background and the way they saw the situation, of course, they said these words, they made this decision. It's not personal. That's just, how they thought, how their thoughts unfolded. Is it permanent? Are they always like that? No, certainly not. Sometimes they're very nice people making great decisions. We don't need to cast some negativity on them. Just because of a few decisions that they made. And then pervasiveness, are they making poor decisions in every aspect of their life? Of course not. No, they're making fantastic decisions. What happens, though, often is just the same way that we blame ourselves, we can tend to blame others. And sometimes we have this divisive speech where we talk about others behind their back, where we spread some kind of negativity, we spread our view, right? We judge others, we judge ourselves, we judge others, we spread this kind of negative view. Specifically, normally it's always to try to make ourselves look better and other people look bad. We need to be really on the lookout for that. It's a really, speaking of karma, it's quite a negative activity to engage in, to be trying to promote ourselves and put others down. Totally natural. We don't need to be heavy on ourselves, but we need to watch ourselves. And say it's a little bit of a dangerous tendency that we have for that. Okay, so that's enough subjecting you to slides, but any thoughts, reactions? That's my initial thoughts on resilience. Thoughts, reactions, questions, anything you want to share?
I was just thinking that if we think about if you think about situations that is it personal, then in what you said that uh, that whoever did some action, they might have done it because of some cause and some conditions. So in that way, nothing is personal. I believe we for everything there is a cause, and there might be some place they might be coming from. So in that way, nothing is personal.
And exactly, and it feels, but it feels like that's not the way we think normally. We then that's our storytelling mind. Our storytelling mind loves people, right? This person went here and did this, and we tell these stories. Um, but the problem is, if you tell a story about a person, who is just bad or just foolish or whatever, how can you help that person? How can you engage with that person in a respectful way? If we just think that they're a lost cause, and certainly, how could we teach them or influence them, or um, so yeah, so we need to enrich our stories. And I like the way that TV dramas and so forth have been going over recent years, where there's a lot more nuance these days. Instead of good guys versus bad guys, right? There's a lot more focus on sort of digging in, what's the backstory of these bad guys? Why are they acting so bad, right? And actually getting some sympathy for them, because you see they're not that different, right? You think about two warring armies, right? It's just like we always tend to take sides, right? But behind those warring armies, there's a whole lot of 20-year-old young men who are just trying to, do a job or defend their family or whatever. And somebody else has some big global reason why they think it's a good idea to get these young men fighting each other. But, the reality is, um, if you look, it's very rare that people want to be bad people, right? Very rare. It's just, and but there's causes and conditions driving us to do the things we do, and looking at that helps us to not be heavy on ourselves as well. There's causes and conditions that led to whatever circumstances we're facing right now. We can learn. That's our opportunity to learn. So, okay, why don't we take a bit of time for some final meditation on this? And so we can again spend some time doing breathing meditation, but more time just reflecting on difficult situations we face, and try to think, how can we approach these with a bit more wisdom so that they're not so heavy? Break them down, think of them as not permanent, not personal, and not pervasive, and approach them with a more robust mind. So again, we can find a comfortable position for our meditation. Taking a deep breath in and out. Another breath with the intention to relax. And as we breathe, we can become attuned to our body, and just ask ourselves, by focusing on our body, does that change our perspective on any of the difficulties that we're facing? Can just being calm, becoming aware of our body or present circumstances, help us to relax some of the story we're telling about catastrophes around us? And we can bring to mind a situation that we find very difficult to bear. A situation that threatens our peace of mind, our composure, our willingness to press forward with our goals. And then in this situation, how are we thinking about ourselves in that situation? What's our mental picture of ourselves? And are we perhaps seeing ourselves as someone incapable of dealing with that situation? But if instead of seeing this as personal, what if we just looked at all of our past reactions and behaviors as coming from causes and conditions? And that we are driven by many causes and conditions, the outer circumstances are driven by causes and conditions. Perhaps the situation is not personal at all. Perhaps it's just circumstances playing out. And is any of this permanent? There's a tendency to see these circumstances as permanent. Is any of it permanent? Is it really pervasive? If we encounter difficulties, do they really pervade every aspect of the situation, or are there just a few parts of the situation that are difficult and most of it is perhaps much less difficult? Then we can reflect that in this short time we've had here, our mind has changed. The world has changed. We've thought about things in a different way. Every action we make is a bet, a chance that the world is moving in a different direction. And these bets compound, our actions compound, the consequences compound. We can ask ourselves, what are the best results that might come from this brief time here? What are the best results that might come for myself or others? And we can put our bet behind, may the best results arise for ourselves and others from this short period of meditation. And then we can open our eyes and rise from our meditation.